I have to be honest with you. I have mixed feelings on this one here. The ACC held some conference meetings this week with the conference commissioner and the athletic directors from the 14 ACC schools, and they do this every year. All the conferences do this every year, and just like every other year, a lot of different topics are discussed. But the topic that seems to be getting the most attention, and really the topic which seems probably most likely to happen for the ACC, they're considering doing away with their divisions. They have 14 teams right now, 2 divisions of 7 teams each. They have the Coastal and the Atlantic. They're strongly considering doing away with that as soon as the 2023 season. So not this coming season, but the next season. Now, obviously, with 14 teams in a conference and only 12 games total played a year in a regular season, there's no way to play every team. So it wouldn't be what the Big 12 has been doing. The Big 12 right now, and for the last a lot of years, has only had 10 teams. So they're able to do that. You only have 10 teams, you got 12 games, that's 9 games, and you've played every team in the Big 12. The ACC would not be able to do that. So they're leaning towards what they're calling the 3-5-5 model. And if I can remember, I'll put a link in the description of this video to an article that explains it if you want to know more about it. But basically, every ACC team would be assigned 3 teams they play every single year. This would ensure that some of the rivalries are able to stay intact. So, for example, I'm sure one of the 3 teams Miami would play every year would be Florida State, right? Whatever else you might want to look at, North Carolina and NC State, North Carolina and Duke, whatever. Every team would have 3 permanent teams they play every single year, and then they would play 5 other teams. The next year, they would play those same 3 teams and the 5 teams they didn't play the year before. So in 2 years, you would play every ACC team, right? 14 teams total. That means you have 13 different opponents within the ACC. You'd play 3 of the same ones every single year and 5 more. And then the second year you'd play the 5 you didn't. I think that should make sense to everybody. So anyway, what do y'all think about that? And here's my thing. The Big 12 has been doing this for a while, and it hasn't worked out. Now, I'm not saying that's because the Big 12 went away from divisions, not saying that. This is why I say I'm torn on it. I kind of like the idea. Well, I do like the idea of playing every team in your conference at least once every 2 years. The SEC is in a similar situation to the ACC, 14 teams, 2 divisions. So, in a lot of cases, it's 5, 6, 7 years in between when Georgia plays LSU, Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, whatever, Texas A&M. So I do like the idea of being able to play everybody within a 2-year period. This cost the Big 12 one year, though. Cost them a playoff team. They would just pick the 2 best teams at the end of the year, and that would be the ACC title game, right? Sounds great. The problem is the possibility exists where you could have more than 2 teams with the same conference record and no tiebreakers, right? Let's take any 3 random ACC teams. Let's say Clemson, Miami, and Florida State. Let's say there's a particular year where Clemson, Florida, and Miami all played each other in the same year. They all finished 11-1. And the losses were to each other. Florida State beat Miami. Miami beat Clemson. Clemson beat Florida State. You'd have 3 teams at 11-1, each with 1 conference loss and no clear tiebreaker. I guess this is what the Big 12 did. They used the highest 2 ranked teams in the poll. I guess that's what the ACC would do, but that is, and that's not likely to happen. I don't think it's happened in the Big 12 since that one time it happened, so it's not something that's likely to happen every year. So I don't think that's a reason to just say, well, we're not, this is a bad idea. But that possibility does exist. The possibility does exist. I was thinking about this has been an argument for a long time against divisions is you don't always get the two best teams to play in the conference championship game. So I started thinking about the SEC. You look at last year, you had a 12-0 Georgia versus a 12-0 Bama. Those were the two best teams in the SEC, one from the East, one from the West. 2020, you had Florida from the East and Alabama from the West. Those were the two best teams in the SEC, one from the East, one from the West. 2019, you had LSU from the West and Georgia from the East. Georgia was 11-1, LSU was 12-0, Alabama was 11-1. So technically, you had the two best teams that year too, Georgia and LSU, right? No, Alabama actually had two losses that year. Alabama had two losses that year because they didn't even play in a New Year's Six game. They played in the Citrus Bowl. So you had the two best teams in 2019. 2018, you had Georgia at 11-1 versus Alabama at 12-0, the two best teams. Those were the two best teams in 2018. 2017, you had Georgia at 11-1 and Auburn at, I believe, 10-2. And Alabama was also at 10-2. So you had the two best teams. Auburn had literally just beat Alabama the week before the SEC title game. So this idea that's been going around about how having divisions means you don't get the two best teams in the championship game, at least in the SEC, it's worked out that way almost every single year. Yeah, if you go back through the history of the SEC title game, yeah, you will find some years where the two best teams were from the West or the two best teams are from the East, whatever the case. Yeah, you'll find a few years like that here and there. Just like in the Big 12, you had one year where you had three teams tied for first. And just like if the ACC goes to this new scheduling model, it's possible you might have a year here or there where you got three teams tied with the same record. But I don't think that's any reason not to consider the idea. And I'm wondering if the SEC doesn't consider something like this too. Now, the problem with the SEC moving towards anything like this right now, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me if you're the SEC to change anything right now based on a 14-team conference, right? When you're going to 16 teams soon. Maybe 23, maybe 24, maybe 25, the year I'm talking. We don't know yet if it's going to be next year. We don't know if it's going to be 2023, 2024, 2025. But do you really want to sort of blow everything up now in the SEC just for a year or two, just to have to blow it up again when Texas and Oklahoma come in and join the league? Because that's what you would have to do, right? SEC is going to have 16 teams, so we can't go with a 3-5-5 model, right? Can't go with a 3-5-5 model. Probably be every 3 years for the SEC could play every other team or something like that because we would have more teams to play than the ACC would. I also, in the article, and again, I'll post a link and you can read it for yourself, there was no mention of how Notre Dame would be incorporated into all that. You know, right now Notre Dame has a contract with the ACC to play, 4 or 5 ACC teams a year. There was no mention in the article I read about how that would continue going forward. So 3-5-5 model for the ACC, you'd play 3 of the same teams every year and then 5 other teams. That's 8 conference games, right? Well, if it happens to be a year where you're playing Notre Dame, that's technically then 9 conference games for that one particular year, I guess, even though the Notre Dame game doesn't count as a conference game. Why did the ACC do this? I'm not going to get off on this whole thing about Notre Dame and how they got 1 foot in and 1 foot out in the ACC. I'm not going to do it because then I'll just be friggin' yelling about that for the next 5 minutes. But the ACC never should have allowed that. Never, ever, ever, ever. The ACC never should have allowed Notre Dame to dictate to them. Anyway, I'm curious what you guys think about the ACC possibly doing away with divisions and whatever team or whatever conference your team is in, whether it's the SEC, the Big Ten, or the Pac-12, which still have divisions and conference championship games based off divisions. Would you be in favor of your conference doing away with divisions and just putting the 2 best teams at the end of the regular season into a conference championship game? Would you be in favor of that? As an SEC guy, I guess I'm okay with that. As long as they can figure out the scheduling, right? I guess I'm okay with that. And I would want to know how the tiebreaker would be handled. There was nothing mentioned in this article either about how a tiebreaker would be handled in the ACC if you had 3 teams with the same record. There's nothing mentioned. So I would need to know maybe some more details before I was completely sold on the idea of the SEC also doing this. But I'm not against it. That's the point. I'm not just hands down against it. I'm willing to listen to whatever ideas may or may not come up regarding the SEC doing something similar. We still don't know what the SEC is going to do. Are they going to, when they add Texas and Oklahoma, are they still just going to have 2 divisions? We've heard this thing batted around about having 4 pods. Well, how would that work? How do you pick 2 teams to play in a championship game from 4 pods? So there's just questions. I just have questions. It's not that I'm necessarily for or against any of the ideas that I've heard, whether it's the ACC idea of doing away with divisions, whether it's the SEC idea of going to 4 pods. It's not that I'm really for or against any of these ideas. It just seems like none of these ideas are fully fleshed out yet, or at least I'm not aware of all the details that I would need to be aware of in order to sort of come down with an opinion one way or the other on it. But anyway, what do you think about it? Let me know. Do you want your conference to do away with divisions and just have the 2 best teams in the total conference play in a conference championship game at the end of the year? Let me know.